I've actually got a couple of videos I shot for the vault to put up on a Friday, and one of them keeps getting pushed back, and I just watched it again to see how much sense it's going to make when I put it up. And it'll make perfect sense until I mention the fact that Michigan beat Ohio State yesterday, which kind of dates the story a little bit, but it's not time sensitive. I will put it up eventually. But I was just skimming around on Facebook last night, as I sometimes do while I'm watching television, and the weirdest thing happened. I saw a pop-up, and it says, the most expensive cars in Jay Leno's collection. Now, I've been to Jay Leno's garage 3 times. He's a very, very nice guy. A couple of years ago, he offered to let my father go for a ride with him in a Duesenberg, and my brother and I tagged along, and I did a video about that. And so Jay's got a lot of cars, and some of them are worth a lot of money. But Jay's not all about the investment in the cars. He's not all about like flipping the cars. He buys cars he likes. So some of the cars he has are valuable. Some of them are not terribly valuable. Some of them are just cool cars. And so you walk through the collection, and it's like, wow, what a cool collection of cars. But when I saw this Facebook thing, the Investing Weekly Journal, say Jay Leno's garage includes this $12 million vintage car, and they show him leaning on a car, which is not the one they're referring to, my first thought was, gee, I wonder which cars they talk about and if they got the story right. You see, because there's actually, on the list of his most valuable cars, they did include the Chrysler Turbine car. Now, I looked the correct direction for once. That, of course, is a model of a Chrysler Turbine car, and I've written a book about the Turbine car. There's also a documentary about the Turbine car. The Turbine car is one of those things that I've studied quite a bit in my life. I've driven 3 of them, and so I know quite a bit about the Turbine cars, and in fact, Jay let me drive his Turbine car. So again, I know a lot about these Turbine cars. But I looked at it, and I immediately spotted a bunch of problems with their article. Now, here's the thing. I understand that someone who's put together an article like this, I doubt they called up Jay and said, hey, Jay, what are the most valuable cars in your collection and how much are they worth? Instead, somebody just said, hey, let's take a look at the cars in the collection and pick 12. We'll talk about them, or however many it was. And so it says number 11, the 1963 Chrysler Turbine. Now, that's correct. The vehicle actually is considered a 1963 model car, which is fascinating they got that right. A lot of times people say 62 or 64. There's a 2-year program where Chrysler lent these cars to people, and that was 1963 and 1964. And the vehicles, the ones that are titled as 1963. And interestingly, Jay Leno bought his from Chrysler. And my understanding is they sent it to him with a certificate of origin in the many, many decades after it was built. So I believe he was the first titled owner. And so that's an interesting thing. But according to this, it says model year 1963. Original value $50,000 to $55,000. And there's an asterisk there, and I couldn't find what the asterisk went to, because that's probably nowhere near correct. And the reason is that the original value is hard to predict because Chrysler never gave an MSRP on these cars. They never intended to sell them. And we know what they cost to build roughly, but we know what it cost the bodies to be built because they were built in Italy by Ghia. But the bodies and everything were built over there, and they were shipped to America in crates, no less, where at the Greenfield plant on Greenfield Road near Detroit, the drivetrains are put into them. The drivetrain was the expensive part because the turbine engine cost tens of thousands of dollars, and Chrysler never gave a value of what those engines cost because they never mass-produced them. And so as a result of that, saying the car is worth $50,000 to $55,000, it probably cost $50,000 to $55,000 for just the body to be built in Italy, because much of it was aluminum, much of it was handmade, and it was an extremely expensive project. But more concerning here is they say the current value is $415,000. If you know someone who's selling a running 1963 Chrysler Turbine car right now for $415,000, let me know, and I know people who will buy it for that. I know people who will jump on that, because I believe these cars, if they're to be sold on the open market, will sell in the millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'm only pointing this out because I think it's interesting, because whoever wrote this article had to speculate to some degree, and the speculation, I'm not sure they'd base that on, because none of these have been sold in the open market for quite some time. One of them changed hands just a couple years ago. And a car collector named Kleptz had it in Indiana. He passed away. His son got the car. His son had the car for a few years, and then his son was going to sell it at an auction. And the people from the Stahl Museum in Michigan heard about that, contacted him and said, look, we'll buy the car directly from you. And they apparently negotiated a price that was so good that the man said, okay, we'll skip the auction. You can buy the car. Now, I don't think the car was sold for as little as $415,000. And if it had been, then it could have gotten much more at auction. But keep in mind, there are only 9 of these cars in the world. Chrysler still has 2 of them. But of the 9 that exist, only 5 of them run, and that's counting Jay Leno's, which doesn't run right now because it's being repaired, which is mentioned in a documentary I'm in. If you want to know more about that, please watch the documentary. I'll link to it in the description below the video. But $415,000 as the current value is wildly short. It is way short. So it does say, also one of the louder cars in Jay Leno's collection, the 1963 Chrysler Turbine, according to the comedian himself, can run using tequila, which is true. The Turbine car was designed by Elwood Engel as a concept car from 1963 to 1964. Okay. It uses an A831 gas turbine engine, which is true. 133 of these vehicles were made, but Chrysler destroyed all but 9. 133. Okay. Again, wildly off. The correct number is 55. They built 55 of them. They destroyed all but 9. Where they got 133 from, I don't know. That's a crazy number. In fact, that's a number that doesn't even make any sense. Because if they said 550, I'd say, oh, they added a digit, you know. But 133 were made. No. They built 55. And that's carved that in stone. We can track all of them. That's exactly what it was. In fact, there's a really, really good book written on the topic that explains all of that. And I would know about the book because I wrote the book. And trust me, if I put it in the book, it's true. Now, it does say 2 of the turbine cars are at Chrysler's factories, 5 are in museums, and the rest are with private owners. That's a little sloppy writing, but again, I don't expect these guys to get this stuff correct. 2 of the Chrysler turbine cars are in the Chrysler archives, which my understanding is a separate entity from what became of Chrysler, which now is called Stellantis. But Chrysler, there's an archive that has 2 of the cars. Theirs both run. It says the rest are with private owners after the 5 are in museums. Well, if you're counting Stahl Museum as a private owner, yes. But that car was with a private owner, but now it's with a Stahl Museum, and that means that instead of saying 5 are in museums, you should say 6 are in museums, right? So 6 plus J's is 7, plus 2 at Chrysler is 9. The turbine never went into production because its engines didn't meet emissions regulations, so Chrysler couldn't get a government loan to build them. Now, running a sentence backwards implies that Chrysler can only build cars if the government lends them money to do so. That's not true. Chrysler couldn't get a government loan to build them. Chrysler didn't need a government loan to build them. The turbine never went into production because its engines didn't meet emissions regulations. That's one of the things that played into it. But the 1963 Chrysler turbine car was an experimental car. It was not ever designed for production use, for general sale to public. They continued developing the turbine engine into the 70s and 80s. And towards the end, Chrysler got a government loan to work on alternative fuel engines. And one of their turbine engines they put into that program and tested it. And they did, in fact, borrow money from the government when they went bankrupt. But 2 totally different things. So this program of the 55 bronze turbine cars had nothing to do with the government loans that were used to bail out Chrysler in the later years. Again, if you want to know more about that, what you should do is watch the documentary from the link in the description below the video, because they also explain the Chrysler bankruptcy and its timing with respect to the turbine program and so on. And there was a connection between turbines and the bankruptcy and the bailout, but it was not the reason that these cars weren't built. These cars were never going to get built in the way in which they were made here. So, again, number 11 on the list of Jay Leno's most expensive cars. They have the Chrysler Turbine car checking in at $415,000 in value. Again, that is wildly low, wildly low. Now, I'll admit, if you said, Steve, can you prove that? I can't. I can't, because we don't know what any of these people paid for these cars, okay? And the cars went from Chrysler to the museums as donations. And then the Klept's car, which became the Stahl car, or the Chrysler car that became the Jay Leno car, those were not public sales in that sense. So we don't know what they sold for. However, I can tell you that when you have a car like the Chrysler Turbine car, which is as famous as it is, there's only 9 of them in the world, only 5 of them run, and in the last 30 years, 2 of them have sold. That puts you up into the rarefied stratosphere of things like, you know, I wouldn't quite say a Ferrari GTO, but trust me when I tell you, I suspect you'd need to cough up a few $1 million to buy one of these, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So again, I'm just pointing this up because a lot of people send me the links to this, say, hey, Steve, check this out. They're talking about turbine cars, thought you should know, and I appreciate that. I like it when people point these things out to me. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.